Alright, so let's take a look at Metasploit again. So I guess I should do my service, Metasploit, start. Well, I guess I gotta start up the database first. I always don't do this because I never really used the Metasploit database. In fact, the image I used to use for classes, it was broken. Console. So we're gonna open up Metasploit and look at some vulnerability scanning in Metasploit. I showed you an auxiliary module in the Metasploit section. So we certainly have many other auxiliary modules besides the example that we looked at about the named pipes. So we can use Metasploit to do some vulnerability scanning as well, if it ever opens. So we're going to take a look at another auxiliary module, and we'll also look at something called the check function that we have on some but not all of the exploit modules that will actually allow us to check whether a vulnerability exists without actually running it. I mean, in some cases, there's really no way to do this. Exploiting it is really the only way to verify, but in some cases, we will have the check function. Of course, as soon as I go do something else, this is actually going to pop up. I probably should have turned it on before I turned on the video, because this is always what happens. I end up here chatting away. So, let's see. I guess I will go do something else. So here's Ubuntu. I don't really have anything to do on Ubuntu, mind you. 7's off. There's XP. Come on, MSF console. You have no excuses. There we go. Finally. Shouldn't be that slow. I guess I could give it more memory. I'm not sure how much it has by default, honestly. But if you have the memory to spare, you can certainly give your virtual machines more memory. Alright, so we've already seen how to use Metasploit. So you can go back to the Metasploit section. So that's what, module number 3. If you need to see it again. So we want to say use. And the example is going to be another auxiliary. I'm going to do scanner and FTP anonymous. Show our options. So we could actually use this to test other credentials as well. So really it should be FTP logon, I guess. I don't know. Because we could just change this to be real credentials. But FTP user is anonymous, and then you're supposed to have your password be your email address, so just use this mozilla@example.com. Our port by default 21, so that's going to be correct. In some cases you might find FTP on like 2121 depending on the platform, but we know how to change that. We just do set our port in 2121. Threads, at most we're going to run this against 2 systems, so 1 thread will be perfectly fine. We can of course make it multi-threaded if we need to. So all we need to set is our hosts. But how about a thought? So if we have our output from nmap, so if we have one of the greppable nmaps, let's see what I've got here. Like, we have, like, here's class scan.gnmap. So if we cat that out, see, this isn't really useful again for 2 hosts, but this is incredibly useful if you have a lot of them. And we learned how to do this pretty much earlier if we went through the Linux section. So what we can do, so here's the cat out of that gnmap. This is why I like gnmap. I mean, it's not very nice to read, but as the name implies, it's great for grepping. So what we can do is we can cat out class scan.gnmap. Well, let's see, let's grep for the word up, because every time a host is alive, we get this status up here. So we got that. Again, in this case, there's only 2, not that exciting, but it could be much, much larger. I do pen tests that are 5,000 to 10,000 hosts, or even more. So let's do that cut. Again, we learned cut in our Linux section. There are other ways of doing this. Like I know people who use awk to do this, or even sed. I like cut. It's easy for me to remember the syntax for it. So I'm going to make the delimiter a space, and I'm going to tell it I want field. I want just the IP address, so I want field 2. That gets me just our IP addresses, and not, again, necessary in this case, but sort them uniquely. I mean, just in case. You never know where you're getting your output from. Always a good idea to sort uniquely. So I put that into, say, live hosts.text. So then what we can do here in Metasploit, again, it would have been easier just to type in the 2 hosts, but when you're doing it against a lot of them, then anything command line confu like is certainly worth it. I'm going to set our host to file : and then this is in the root directory, the root and live hosts.text, so it will pull the data from live hosts.text to do this scan. Alright, so we don't need a payload since this is just an auxiliary, so we can go ahead and type run or exploit. I usually just end up saying exploit instead of run because it works everywhere. So we do have anonymous read access. So we saw that one of those, the Windows system, looks like that'll be pretty interesting. There's something called passwords.txt. Might be worth grabbing. So again, I encourage you to spend some time looking at different auxiliaries, and if Metasploit is still a bit shaky, go back and look at the Metasploit section. I definitely think there's probably nothing you could learn that would benefit you more than Metasploit. Metasploit is really the de facto for pen testing, so it's definitely worth knowing. Alright, so let's look at one more thing with Metasploit, because again, we can use our auxiliaries for vulnerability scanning, but we can also, if we go back to our exploit Windows SMB MS08_067, we saw that Nessus found that, but I always, again, like to get at least 2 things saying that it's true. If exploitation is allowed, if you're doing a pen test, then you can certainly just exploit it to find out. But if you're just doing vulnerability work, you might just need to do a manual check if possible to see if it's there. In some cases, there may be no manual check. It's exploited or nothing, so you may not always be able to figure it out. But I always try and get at least 2 things saying that it's true. So if we show our options, we should remember this. So we want our R host to be Windows XP. And the SMB pipe is correct as browser. Remember, there is an auxiliary for that. We saw that in our Metasploit section. We can do the automatic targeting. Instead of setting a payload and doing exploit, what I'm going to do is use the check function. Again, not all Metasploit exploit modules have this. In some cases, it's just not possible to check. And even if it is, there's no requirement that the developer of the module implement the check function. It says the target is vulnerable, so that's cool. That's something we can exploit. Of course, we already knew that because we already tried it as our example exploit in a previous module. But on our pen test, that would let us know that, yes, indeed, we have confirmation from 2 sources that this is probably a good one to try and exploit. And based on either previous knowledge or research, we'll find that MS08067 is a really good one to try and exploit if it's available. It's pretty steady, unlikely to bring the service down. It does give you system level access, and interestingly enough, you can exploit it over and over again, which makes it a really good one for class where we might do things wrong and kill our sessions. So that's one we will be able to exploit. So again, not everything's going to have the check functions.